Hey everyone, welcome back to the Fieldwork Podcast. My name is Mitchell Hora.
And I am Zach Johnson. This is the Fieldwork Podcast where we talk about sustainable ag practices, what's working, what's not working. I think that's what we're doing here. We also kind of go off the cuff. We do pen drops when we say something really cool.
That's a new thing that we're going to introduce into this episode here and talk about a lot of new stuff, So today's episode, we're going to talk about third crops. And Zach, you and I are in hardcore corn and soybean territory. When people talk about other crops, we talk about different maturity corn, and that is about it.
Yeah.
And maybe my little sweet corn patch, that is like a couple 100 feet.
If your sweet corn patch is like mine, it's the one that you really grow for the raccoons
That's
to
right.
come out and eat, so you don't really get any yourself. But yeah, we're sitting here in the upper Midwest, corn and soybean country. There isn't a lot of other markets, a lot of other places to go with other crops.
Well, Zach, so I'm excited to talk about this topic here today. Something I've been doing a lot of brainstorming about on how can I integrate other crops into my operation. As we've talked about, we were doing some things with cover crops, but in order to get that to work, I really need to be able to quantify some economic benefit out of it. We're set up where all the infrastructure is aligned for corn and soybeans, and that's about it. So this whole different crop deal is wide open. There's a lot of infrastructure that has to be made and a lot of market that has to be produced. But I think when it comes back to improving water quality, keeping that ground covered, implementing, the 5 principles of soil health, diversity is one of those items. Keeping the ground covered is one of those basic principles of soil health. And of course, not disturbing the soil.
We're going to learn more about this process, and we're going to talk to Darin Voigt, a farmer from Minnesota.
We're also going to talk to Nick Jordan. He's an ag ecology expert at the University of Minnesota. Guys, thanks for joining us in the studio here today. Why don't each of you give us a little background on yourselves and a little intro, especially as it pertains to integrating the third crop?
Well, Darin, why don't you go first?
All right. I grew up on the family farm. I still live there. I live in the home place. I farm with 3 brothers, dad, nephews, nieces, a bunch of us. Anyway, so we're corn, soybeans, alfalfa, sweet corn, peas. We have cattle, beef cattle, all the way through to finish. And we'd also have a sideline business. How did you put that?
Moving hog manure around.
Yeah, I'm a hog waste technician.
Fertility manager.
Fertility
so
manager.
fancy.
That sounds better, yeah.
That's awesome.
So, we've
So-
been experienced with other, off the mainstream crops. So,
Very cool. How long have you been trying some of those other things?
quite a while. We've always been peas and sweet corn just because it fits in good with the cattle rotation. So, we did cover crop last couple of years, kind of experiment with that, and that's kind of opening us up to a lot of stuff too. So,
Very cool. Well, thanks. Yeah, we'll dig into that here as we go. Nick, give us a little background on what you're working on.
Thank you, Mitchell. So I'm Nick Jordan. I am a professor in the agronomy and plant genetics department at the University of Minnesota. I am from Minnesota. I have not farmed in my life except for a summer picking vegetables when I was 12 in Massachusetts. But I am the descendant of wheat farmers from South Dakota. And I work as part of a very large network of people in the Midwest called the Forever Green Initiative. And what we are trying to do is to come up with a portfolio of crops that grow at times when corn and soybean are not growing. And we are trying to come up with economically viable crops that make money for not just farmers, but everybody else in the supply chain.
Let's jump back to Darin for a second. Darin, my understanding is that you've got a lot of experience with third crop options. A lot of that is sort of tied in with your cattle operation. Can you explain to us a little bit about what you've done with as far as third crops and what you're growing and how that's worked for you in your operation?
we started back years ago when like the small grains kind of went out. Wasn't a lot of option. The vegetable option come in.
Yep.
And it worked out really well because the peas we generally plant. We get the later or the earlier planted peas, but they come off early. So then it gives us a chance to do like a winter rye, maybe get rid of some manure, And then early fall when we wean calves, it gives us a green basic pasture to put cattle onto, which basically is a whole second crop to the peas. Because we never did the peas that were early enough for soybeans, and sometimes that's a hit and miss if you can follow peas behind or beans behind peas. But in the sweet corn, we always had the later stuff, so then that would give us, let's say the winter rye we planted this fall would green up in the spring, and we'd calve on it or graze on it, and then the sweet corn would go in towards the end of June. So we could graze that up to that point. There again, apply manure to it, get it worked up, ready for the sweet corn. So it kind of double crop both
Yeah,
that. It worked out real well.
So wheat kind of as a cover crop, but you're going to pasture on it, then you're going to harvest that, then plant the corn, sweet corn.
We'd never usually harvest. It's rye, winter rye.
Oh, winter rye.
And we never usually harvest it.
Just graze it
The
down.
cattle. The cattle
Oh, I
harvest
see.
it.
Cool. And then what are you typically planting after those peas? Instead of, you said you could do a double crop and do soybeans afterwards. But
We're doing the winter rye right after the peas.
right after the peas. Okay.
Yep.
Then you got that greening up in the fall.
Right, because that
and
takes,
in the spring.
right, because that'll come back in the spring, and
Very cool.
it actually is kind of strange because it greens up when it's still snow on the ground.
Oh,
As soon as it gets our first warm, it'll start greening up. So it's a place to put the cows right away to get them eating on something. And
For sure.
So that rye must take off as early as you're getting it planted right after the peas then. So are you able to put the cattle on that in the fall?
oh yeah,
In the
yep.
fall and in the spring?
Early September. We'll probably
Okay.
maybe get a month behind it. The month of August, and then it's pretty greened up and pretty ready to go for them. And
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Provides a lot of options. And I think we hear that a lot with guys with cattle too. You definitely get some more options. You got other ways of being able to make a dollar off of it besides
right.
trying to take it to actual harvest. And so that's pretty cool that you got some options and whatnot there. So, Nick, how's that tie into things that you've been working on?
Well, in a lot of different ways. So, yeah, I absolutely agree that when you have some animals in the situation, it really does help, monetize the cover cropping. So I think that's a very interesting option that we see. Let me step back a little bit and just talk to you guys a little bit about where we're coming from in the university in this whole Forever Green project. So one of the things that we feel is not recognized enough is just how unique the Upper Midwest is in terms of having the soil that we have and the climate and the water. These are really globally very, very important treasures, essentially. And so the thing that we feel is important is thinking about the future 10, 20, 30 years down the road. What's going to be the condition of that soil and that water? And we feel that we ultimately have got to have a larger diversity of stuff growing, not necessarily in the summer, but in the rest of the year. So one of the things that we know from soil science is that good soil is created by plants. They are the things that do that work. And so having living roots in the soil for as much of the year is obviously a good thing. And obviously it has to be economically viable. So our whole question is, what do we do to make that happen? And so we're very interested in the following things. Thing number one is the idea of cash cover crops, what we call cash cover crops. And these are what they sound like. And so we are working in this Forever Green Initiative project to develop a couple of winter hardy oilseed crops, one of which is a brand new crop called pennycress, but it's derived from the weed pennycress that you guys are familiar with.
I was going to say, yeah, pennycress is not a new crop for us. We've been killing it for a long time.
Well, that's right. That's right.
or trying.
Yeah, trying to kill
Or
it.
trying. But so our plant breeders have a new variety of pennycress that has oil that is, in terms of its composition, just like the oil from canola. And this is quite an achievement because that wild pennycress that you guys have has a highly toxic oil. And so we've been working on that. There's another winter hardy oilseed called winter camelina. It's an older crop, but not all that improved. We're very interested in winter peas, although they're not really hardy in the upper Midwest just yet. We have a winter barley that is almost reliably hardy in Minnesota. And so that's one area that we're really working on, is these cash cover crops. We are working also on a perennial grain that is called intermediate wheatgrass, or sometimes it's called kernza. We also are working on hybrid hazelnuts as a woody crop that produces large yields of nuts that are rich in oil and protein and can yield very well once they get established. And then we're also interested in doing new things with old crops. So alfalfa, for example, is a very interesting crop if we look ahead in the future for plant protein and for people. So you guys are aware that peas have become kind of interesting, not just as a vegetable or as like a dried pea, but as a source of plant protein to put in all kinds of products. Alfalfa has the same potential. It also has potential to be used in things like aquaculture feed. And our USDA folks have got some pretty good aquaculture feeds from alfalfa now. So there's a possibility to increase the scope of the world's needs for alfalfa well beyond dairy. And so I'm just trying to paint a little picture of the things that we're working on. And the last thing I want to say about it is that every single one of these crops needs a bunch of work. So on the one hand, they need some plant breeding to develop their characteristics that way. We have to figure out the agronomy and how they get fit into our existing systems. We are not trying to displace corn and soybeans, which are obviously wonderful and globally essential crops. We are trying to add to corn and soybeans in the same way that I heard you talking about, Darin. So obviously the agronomy of fitting these third crops into the mix is a little tricky. There obviously needs to be Mitchell, you mentioned that the infrastructure that we have is largely geared to corn and beans. There needs to be infrastructure for these new crops as well. There has to be ways of making products that the world wants to buy out of this stuff, and there have to be end-use markets that want to buy this stuff. So that all adds up to a chicken and egg problem. And what we are doing that's very interesting is trying to go forward to cautiously try to figure out each one of those missing links in the chain.
I'm glad that you brought that up, Nick, at the end there about having the markets to go with this kind of stuff. Because as somebody who puts myself out there online a lot, I get a lot of comments about, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Why don't you plant sunflowers or alfalfa or plant 1,000 acres of hemp? And it all comes back to it has to work economically, number one, with your operation. Number two, the biggest thing is there has to be somewhere to take that. I can't plant a crop that doesn't have a market, and I'm not going to drive halfway across the country to bring it somewhere, or it's not economical. So
Amen.
We have to figure out, if we're going to do those kinds of things, how to make that work when it comes to boots on the ground, in the field, the reality of actually getting farming done, aside from just, reading the great stuff on Google about what we can do with cover crops. We have to get it to work with the art of farming and not just the data.
Now, can I say one other real quick thing? And that is
no.
We also
stick to a very strict schedule on the Fieldwork podcast.
Did he say can or may I?
That's a good point. My teachers always hounded me on that in school.
Because I don't know if he can say something short, because he's a wealth of knowledge.
I know.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to try to be quick with this. And that is that there's another kind of market that has to be developed, we think, and that is a market by which farmers get compensated for the environmental benefits that they create through their farming. And so one of the things that we think is important is we've seen a lot of big rainfall in the Midwest lately, increasing pattern of that. And we have, some serious issues with flooding that ties with those big rainfalls. Agriculture has the ability to hold on to water and to do that in a very significant way and to charge society for that. Another good example is the metro. The metro area in Minnesota is expanding. They're either going to have to build expensive new wastewater treatment plants, or they probably could save themselves a fair bit of money by working with farmers to hold on to those same nutrients. And working out those markets is not as important as the main commodity markets, but that's an important part of the whole deal too.
Well, Nick, any of that nutrient though that you're leaving that comes right down to Iowa to me, we'll take it.
Darin, jumping back to you now, as somebody who has worked with third crop options and who's done this on his farm, beyond just the data, you've actually had your boots on the ground and worked with some of this. What are some of the benefits that you've seen, and what are some of the successes that you've personally had on your farm working with third crops and making them work for you?
Well, one big thing is like you alluded to is the erosion. If you go by, in the spring of the year when everything's running off, you go by a field that's winter rye coming. The snow is clean in the ditches. The water coming off is clean. That's a huge thing. We're not giving away our soil to you guys in Iowa.
That's in Iowa.
We're keeping it.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then, but other than that, it's just soil health. Soil health is huge when you get, you always have something out there, some roots in the ground, something growing, something taken in the sunshine is huge for the biology in the soil and soil health. And like I said, a lot of these crops don't necessarily are financially effective, but a lot of times it's what follows behind it that is more than makes up for what the benefit it left behind is consumed by the following corn crop or soybean crop.
There's a longer term benefit rather than an immediate financial return.
Oh, right.
There's
Yep.
a longer term benefit for you on your farm.
Well, but it looks like, your way to ease into creating some of these other crops was you found a couple crops that could be very economically viable for you, though, in the short term. But it takes a lot of labor. It takes a lot of other adjustments, I think, to do some of the crops that you're talking about integrating with as far as sweet corn and peas and whatnot. There's certain kind of infrastructure that you have to have versus some of the new crops that you're talking about, Nick, that maybe fit in a little bit more to our current situation versus changing as many variables as what you guys had to do on your farm. And it sounds like there's enough people helping to get all the work done, but it takes a lot of infrastructure and maybe some time. So how did that process maybe start when you guys started into that, as far as starting into the sweet corn and the peas and that kind of stuff?
Well, they come around looking for growers on the sweet corn and peas side, so we jumped in thinking about the other benefits of it. But there's a chance that they're kind of pulling out this year now because they closed down the Rochester, Minnesota, Seneca. But so we're still gonna do stuff. We're gonna do oats because we need the straw for the cattle. And there again, the oats you pencil it and it doesn't pencil out. But the following 2 years, 3 years of corn crop or soybeans is huge. I mean, it's more than makes up for what you've lost besides the fact of needing the crop.
What do you notice? I mean, when you say it's huge, what are the benefits that you see from that? What are you getting from your oats?
Last year, just an example, last year we went out in a field of cover crop. It was oats and stuff we had the year before, and then rye. And rye come back in the spring. We went out there with a planter, and we planted it on a day when there was no planters going in the neighborhood because it just had rained. But it was our first field. I was like, well, let's get out there. Let's try it. Make sure the planter's all going to work. Well, see, there's no mud to stick to your tires.
Right.
We didn't do tillage.
Yeah.
And then that corn, it never skipped a beat. It might have been a couple weeks before we got back in. We did 3 no-till fields, and that was our best field. Was the one that followed behind so I mean, it don't have to just be any kind of cash crop to it, but that part right there was huge.
You just had more of the water infiltration, maybe a little bit better structure from the living roots that were out there.
It won't seal up. It won't get that hard top like if you push a normal field that you did tillage on. So that's huge. Just the ability to go out, every plant come up.
Yeah.
And you go out and dig. When I couldn't believe it, I started going. I went back to see if my depth and spacing was right. It's so mellow. It's not muddy. It's just, it's wet, but it wasn't. It was really neat. It was a neat experience.
Really awesome. So now, okay, what's your thoughts on a variety of these other crops? So it sounds like you might have to change things up. Do you think you need some of these other kind of things now too? Or what's some of your goals, I suppose, on your farm, as you look into the future here?
Well, I think a big thing is we're going to try to get into like aerial seeding or trying to get cover crop in the row crop. So when that row crop comes off, it gives us both grazable and just soil health to always have something growing out there, something going. And we're always open for other things like he'd mentioned, but like Zach said, that there's got to be a place for them.
Yeah.
You can't, unless you can graze them.
There you go.
Well, Alfalfa,
Yeah.
obviously.
No, we do alfalfa. Yeah, and that's really good for the soil too. The
Yeah.
nitrogen it puts back in the soil, and it totally changes the structure of it.
For sure.
Yeah.
That's cool. One, so for me down in Southeast Iowa, obviously we don't have other crops hardly at all. I mean, maybe a little bit of alfalfa for some guys with cattle, but there's not much. What I'm doing in order to try to integrate some of this stuff is to do some relay cropping with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to try some of it this year where we've got wheat. So we have cover crop on pretty much everything that we farm. This is our 4th year with that. And what I'm going to do is I've got winter wheat out there on most of our acres for cover crop because it just worked. It was available instead of cereal rye. But I'm going to actually drill my soybeans into some of the wheat and then try to harvest that wheat off in the summer with my soybeans coming up and going, and then they'll be growing and hopefully be really great come the fall. So doing that, because for me, part of our holdup on integrating a different crop, especially a cereal crop, is just the revenue per acre is not there. So, and we have land expense of easily $250. Some of my stuff that I bought, I'm paying back a mortgage on it that's $450 an acre a year. So I got to make some serious cash coming in order to just get close to breaking even. On my farm, I'm not getting close to breaking even because that's buying a new farm. It's kind of the way it is for the first quite a while. But
aren't
on a lot
all
of Dutch-
farmers rich?
Well, I'd like to meet the ones who are because we're not getting it off. We're we got a long way to go. So, but we need to have some other options. And what we've got penciled out is if I can harvest a third of a wheat crop and I can harvest half of a soybean crop, I'm still doing really well. And seeing maybe some of those benefits and keeping the ground covered all the time. So we're going to try some of that. And then, like I said, with the interseeding kind of stuff, I'm going to do some of that this year too. But I'm actually going to do some wider row spacing in order to integrate that seed in August or so. And then be able to have that seed up and growing to get my relay crop to work better in 2020 and the following year. So trying some different spacing. What I'm going to do is I've got 2 rows of 30-inch corn and then skip a row. So I've got 2 30s, skip a row. So I've got like 45 inches of corn, 45 inches of gap, and that's where I'll put in my interseeded cover crop, probably a mix of a couple different things, with cereal rye to overwinter and harvest that when I've got soybeans and rye out there in the following year. I've got it online. People can see it on my Twitter and follow along and whatnot with that. So that's what I'm trying to bring in some other crops and whatnot, but still keep to my straight up corn and soybean rotation, but just integrate in some other crops and try to relay crop it or interseed and be able to pull something else off it. Because without cattle on it, besides my neighbor's cows when they get out, without that, I'm trying to just harvest all of it. And then we're quantifying the soil health benefits and reducing our synthetic inputs to be able to match up to those improved soil conditions. So, I don't know, thoughts like that. I'm trying to experiment and do stuff different and a couple things that haven't been done that much before. There's a couple guys who are trying some of those things, but
I've heard
not much.
when you mentioned the double harvest, I've heard where people plant the wheat and the soybeans timed right, and they'll harvest it all at one shot with the same head, and then they'll take that mixed crop, take it into a cleaner, and then separate it. I've heard that's kind of unique, but I never heard of doing it your way.
Yeah,
they
I'm
can
gonna
get the
try to do it.
combine set to harvest the wheat and the soybeans both efficiently.
Well, but you'd have to clean it all out.
Green combines.
Oh,
Well, I've got a green combine.
there it is. We knew we had.
Now that we've lost half our listeners,
I'd like to do my mic drop now, but I can't.
you want to borrow my pen? Do a pen drop?
Pen drop.
There it is.
That's awesome.
Well, Mitchell,
So if you're gonna clean it anyway, though, then you can clean out all the other pods and that kind of stuff that you're gonna have with it.
I suppose, yeah.
You're gonna clean
Just
it
put
anyway.
it all in there.
That's fine. Throw in other stuff. Throw some corn in there too.
I wanted to mention we have that relay cropping system going on with the winter hardy oil seeds too. It's the same
There you
kind
go.
of concept, and it works out pretty good in terms of sort of oil equivalent. It increases the if if you have your relay cropped camelina or pennycress, and then your soybeans, it increases the oil by about 2/3. That the relay crop system. So obviously it has costs too, but it's a substantial increase and it's got a protein component too in the seed from the oil seeds.
How tall? Okay, so part of with this relay cropping system, height is a thing that I've really got to factor in.
Right.
How tall is that pennycress going to be?
It's about 24 inches.
24 inches tall.
Yeah.
So, and how close to the ground would you have to harvest it? Pretty
well, the beans are 6 to 8 inches high when we harvest it, so it seems to work out okay.
Yeah.
Nick, you mentioned you work with Forever Green Initiative in trying to get things going and get some of this stuff actually working for farmers. Do you have any success stories or things or ways that you've had success actually making that happen? And I guess the second part of that is, how can farmers help with that, or what can farmers do? I mean, how do we really get those markets going so that these options can become available to us?
Well, I have to be completely candid with you guys that there are that the markets for everything that I talked about are emerging. So in other words, the production areas that we have are limited in size, but we are figuring out how to grow the stuff. And, the point is that nobody should be taking any big risks, obviously, with this stuff. And so in a very risk-managed way, we're trying to roll this stuff out. We are trying to create a few areas where we can grow enough of these crops that the world can experiment with building the supply chain stuff, the supply chain infrastructure that's needed to get these to markets. And General Mills, for example, has made an investment in a seed cleaning facility in North Dakota for this intermediate wheatgrass, which I think, Zach, is worth mentioning as a success because they have put some number of millions of dollars on the line to build this facility because they see that as essential. And there is a company called Healthy Food Ingredients, which supplies a lot of the quote-unquote sustainably sourced materials to General Mills that is the owner of this new facility, but it was financed by General Mills. We are also trying to create these areas, we call them pilot supply chain projects, for lack of a better term. Because, obviously, for all this to get off the ground, it can't be farm by farm. It has to be a concentrated area. So we're trying to put these in places where there are some concerns with drinking water protection also in certain parts of rural Minnesota that have to do with nitrates. And the ability of this perennial grain crop to, we think, keep some of those nitrates from getting into the drinking water sources. So that's, again, a matter of you have to have a certain amount of it in a given place to see if that works or not.
Yeah.
In theory, it's going to work, but we have to try it out.
Same kind of thing that you saw with your sweet corn and whatnot there, too, at your farm, that they had the facility there in Rochester to be able to do it. And like for me, I'm the wheat and the rye that we're raising, it's just for seed. So we're raising it because I got a lot of farmers in the area that are looking for cover crop seed.
That's good, yeah.
So that's where we're raising it for. And we had mentioned before on rewarding farmers based on how they are farming and their environmental impact. The Ecosystem Service Marketplace Consortium, some of the efforts that Land O'Lakes is doing with Sustain, but just a lot of these groups that the Noble Foundation is helping to drive as well, Walmart is driving, to reward farmers based on their impact on some of these environmental, impacts. What's your thoughts on some of those? How is U of M getting involved? What do you see kind of playing out along those lines that as farmers we can start preparing our farms to be able to find better market placement?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's a fundamentally important frontier. We have to follow up on that. I believe that the biggest issue is, again, that it's difficult to get that sort of thing going on a farm-by-farm basis. So having groups of farmers that are working together to essentially market those environmental benefits seems to us to be really important. That's most obvious around water, because you can think about measuring water at the bottom of a watershed. And you can imagine an arrangement where a group of farmers are being paid by, again, the Met Council, that area, that government body here in the metropolitan area that is responsible for water quality, water treatment. I mentioned that idea that we're going to have 1 million more people in the metro area in the next 10 years. There's going to be new wastewater treatment challenges from that bunch of folks. And the cost of building the new facilities is really large. And so there's a real opportunity for agriculture to get into the nutrient trading. So we hold on to phosphorus, and the Met Council pays us to do that rather than building a plant. But again, that doesn't work farm by farm. So what you need to do is to think about some kind of way. I mean, we could think of it as a co-op, for example, but there needs to be some way that farmers can market those environmental benefits in a way that is, efficient and doesn't have too much cost associated with that. So we're working very much on that stuff, Mitchell, trying to figure out and it's also important because that is a way that farmers can negotiate with, say, the Met Council. If you are one farmer, your negotiating power is very limited. You're probably a price taker. But if you have the ability to, say on a watershed scale, deliver a significant quantity of phosphorus retention, you have some ability to set a price for that. So we think that kind of stuff is really important. That's also important for negotiating with, say, the Walmarts of the world around nitrogen. Say, Walmart, of course, is asking farmers to
For
change
carbon,
the way they,
especially on carbon, with Project Gigaton for them.
Yeah.
Not as much on nutrients for them. It's more so on the carbon aspect versus the water aspect.
Okay.
I'd say, right?
But I'm also aware of their nitrogen stuff. But sure.
Oh,
I mean, the point is just that if it's, again, is it price takers or price makers? And if you have to have some ability to negotiate. Otherwise, obviously, Walmart's going to want to drive the price for that carbon down as low as possible. That's what they do.
Yeah.
And so those are some of the things that we're trying to experiment with, Mitchell.
Kind of feeding off of that. So we know the work that you've been doing, Nick, with Forever Green, and we know, Darin, you've got third crop options that have been working for you on your farm. What do you have, Darin, as somebody who's made this successful on his farm? What do you have for advice for farmers to make this work? Like for me, and well, Mitchell's got some other stuff going on, but for myself, we're all corn and soybeans right now at this point because, as we've talked about, that's what the markets are calling for. That's what works out economically for us. What kind of advice would you have for a farmer like me who would be interested in potentially getting into, a viable third, fourth crop option?
Well, I would say this, like everything. We know nowadays and age we don't believe everything we hear, or should believe very little probably. So don't take my word for it. You do it, try it on a small piece. Try 20 acres. It ain't going to make or break you. It ain't going to make you $450 an acre like you need to make, but just try it on a small piece and see what it is. That's what we did. We tried on a small piece and let's say take a field and divide it in half and do cover crop on half, not on half, or do oats on a little strip. And, because if you take a 100-acre field and you put a 10-acre strip of oats, even if you're just going to throw it away, see what the results are next year.
Sure.
Because the market can fluctuate that much in 2 days of what you're going to lose on 20 acres out of whatever you farm total.
Right.
But just try it. Try it for yourself. Maybe it's not your thing. Maybe you'll excel above most people on it. But that's what I would say is try it and see what you notice. Just study it and don't do it. None of this stuff you can do 1 year and be like, yeah, that was a joke. What's Darin's phone number? I need to call him. But do it 2 or 3 years in a row. Do the same piece and see what you start noticing. You'll notice your nitrogen needs are going to drop. You'll notice your fertilizer needs are going to drop. You might bump your following yield 10%, but your nitrogen needs might go down a third to half what they were. But just try it. Everybody's soil is different. Everybody's got a different way about doing it. You'll never do it the same the second year as you did the first. You'll learn. But that's what I think is interesting. Just try it.
Have you had a lot of people in your neighborhood and whatnot that are out there trying a lot of stuff too, or not as much as what there really should be?
I would say since the prevent plan here a few years back, more people are trying it because they've seen what it did.
Yeah.
The following year, there's more people doing that. There's a guy in the area who used to do just crop dusting. Now he flies out a lot of rye, a lot of different cover crops in the fall. There's a lot of people trying it, but on the same side of it, it doesn't do a lot of good to do a cover crop and then the next year go in and just till it all up and start fresh. Just leave it go. Let its roots do its thing for a few years to see what happens. But yeah, there's people trying it. I don't think it's for everybody either. Some people just can't stand seeing that piece not tilled under, turn to corn, turn to beans. How am I going to make money? But it takes time.
So when you talk about just try it, 10, 20 acres, 30 acres, whatever, the first place my head goes is somewhere that non-farmers probably don't understand as easily as the fact that I'm not equipped to just try 20 acres of oats. I'm equipped to plant 2,500 acres of corn and soybeans as efficiently as possible. So I don't have the stuff to plant oats or these cover crops or whatever. So do you have any advice? I mean, what did you do when you first got into it? Maybe you were equipped, but Nick had talked a little bit too about getting the areas going and getting farmers to work together to get this going. Do you have experience with that? I mean, did you hire a neighbor who had the right equipment to put oats in, or how do you go about that?
Actually, at first, all we did is had the elevator come out, put a little bit of potash with your rye seed, have them blow it on, then till it lightly in, which takes nothing. I mean, as far as
Sure.
everybody tills their ground,
Yeah, scratch it in a little
everybody
bit.
has an elevator that comes out and spreads. Just
So it was just a broadcast application.
Yep.
Okay.
and you don't have to work it in, but as long as you have the ability to, it's better.
Scratch it
Sure.
in. Sure.
But and then you could do, get to the point where you grow cover crops for your neighbors. I'm sure every area of the country cover crops are kind of taken on, and some people dabbling with it. Well, if you use your 20 acres to grow seed for 10 other farmers, then you don't need a market for it because they'll come to you and get it. And the nice thing about that is when you harvest it, if they're going to do the same way of spreading it as you did, just broadcast it, you don't need to have clean seed. You don't need to send it to a cleaner.
Sure.
Just put it in a bin and sell it out of there for farmers. That's one
You
way
can
to
just
try
leave
it.
all the cocklebur and the water hemp seeds in there
Oh,
and
yeah.
sell it to the neighbors.
Oh, yeah.
Well, sell it. They're making it. Don't you use cocklebur? Hyola cocklebur, you said?
Ohio Lake cocklebur?
Hyola cocklebur.
Oh, we're working on
Buttonweed.
pennycress.
Oh, pennycress. Oh,
Pennycress.
sorry.
But
my bad.
great idea. We'll get on it.
Marketing cockleburrs. I like it. That's hilarious. Well, any other kind of last minute thoughts and whatnot before we wrap up today? A lot of really good conversation, maybe especially places that we can go to get some more information and carry on the conversation from today's brief intro into this topic.
Well, we've got a website, naturally, Mitchell, for the
yeah.
Forever Green. I think you guys are aware that we have now this Minnesota Office of Soil Health, and that's a pretty good resource as well. But I think that one of the things that you guys are putting on the table here is the importance of farmer, inventor, innovator kind of activity. In other words, figuring out both how you do this stuff in a particular place, in a particular soil, and in a particular farming situation, and starting to build out the ability in a community, what you're talking about providing seed, and you've got a little bit of a business going. That kind of farmer-driven activity is going to be completely necessary to this business of some diversification in our Midwest agriculture. So I would want to really underscore the importance of that.
I a lot of times follow the mindset, if you want what everybody else has, do what everybody else does. And if you look around, sometimes you don't want that. So you got to do something different.
Well, I've been trying, but how do I get a really sweet beard like that? I mean, does that
That's
apply?
definitely something that you need. I can't do it at all.
I know.
Fertilizer.
This is as good as it gets.
Fertilizer.
Oh,
Fertilizer and
fertilizer.
time.
There you
Just
go.
have the co-op spread it.
Yeah, you can have them blend it and spread it. Stand there and smile as they come by.
Is that like a spray tan kind of thing? Is that how those work too?
It's a spray beard.
Chia beard.
Chia beard. That is awesome. Get yours online, Amazon.
Amazon. It's any local distributor near you.
There you go.
Is chia a viable third cover crop option?
That's what we need right there.
If it's high oil.
High oil,
High
chia.
High
protein.
beard oil.
Yeah,
High beard oil, chia.
organic. Gotta be organic.
Oh, well, of course. That is hilarious. Well, so if you want more info on chia beards, you can find that online. Darin can help you out with that. But any more info and whatnot on us, we'll have some of these links queued up at the Fieldwork website, on our social media pages, whatnot, of course, as well. But Zach, another good episode here today.
Yeah, really, really good episode. Thank you guys for coming in here. Another interesting topic. Another one that, I mean, we could just roll on this for hours. I feel like, it's fun to sit here and talk about this kind of stuff. It's easier than actually going and doing it.
Well, I think a lot of, my takeaway from this is that there's not a lot of hardcore secured answers in this space yet, but there's a lot of work that's being done, a lot of things that we have to figure out. But I think as farmers, we realize that we've got to do something different. Darin, like you said, that if you can't just keep doing what everyone else is doing and keep in the status quo and keep being a price taker instead of going out there and making a change. So we hope we encourage you to try some new things and to do some research and to do a little thinking about your operation as you're listening to this podcast here today, and thinking about how you can change and where you want to be in the next 10, 20, 40 years, and even after that, as future generations are farming your ground.